Amen. I don't know if anybody had a chance to go over the study last night. Probably didn't. We got a bit late and it's an early start. Just want to quickly read those last paragraphs from Testimonies to Church, Volume 9. Page 28. It's 90:28. We all there? An impressive scene. In the visions of the night, a very impressive scene passed before me. I saw an immense ball of fire among some beautiful mansions, causing their instant destruction. I heard someone say, "We knew that the judgments of God were coming upon the earth, but we did not know that they would come so soon." Others, with agonized voices, said, "You knew. Why then did you not tell us?" We did not know. On every side I heard similar words of reproach spoken. So when it says, I heard someone say, we knew the judgments of God were coming, but not so soon, who's that talking about? Sister Rachel?
God's people who knows these things.
God's people who knows these things. Someone else said? Who else spoke?
The SDA Church.
SDA Church? River James? Seventh-day Adventist. In distress, I awoke. I went to sleep again and I seemed to be in a large gathering. One of authority was addressing the company, before whom was spread out a map of the world. He said that the map pictured God's vineyard, which must be cultivated. As light from heaven shone upon anyone, that one was to reflect the light to others. Lights were to be kindled in many places, and from these lights still other lights were to be kindled. The words were repeated, "Ye are the salt of the earth, but if the salt have lost his savour, wherewith shall it be salted? It is thenceforth good for nothing, but to be cast out and to be trodden under foot of men. Ye are the light of the world. A city that is set on an hill cannot be hid, neither do men light a candle and put it under a bushel, but on a candlestick, and it giveth light unto all that are in the house. Let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven." Matthew chapter 5. I saw jets of light shining from cities and villages, and from the high places and the low places of the earth. God's word was obeyed, and as a result there were memorials for him in every city and village. His truth was proclaimed throughout the world. Then this map was removed and another put in its place. On it light was shining from a few places only. The rest of the world was in darkness, with only a glimmer of light here and there. Our instructor said, "This darkness is the result of men's following their own course. They have cherished hereditary and cultivated tendencies to evil. They have made questioning and fault-finding and accusing the chief business of their lives. Their hearts are not right with God. They have hidden their light under a bushel." If every soldier of Christ had done his duty, if every watchman on the walls of Zion had given the trumpet a certain sound, the world might have heard the message of warning, but the work is years behind. While men slept, Satan has stolen a march upon us. So I thought I'd read it just in case we didn't get a chance to do it, because I just wanted to tidy the last bits and pieces from this section. So she has these two maps. What's that telling us? Two groups of people. Mr. Rachel?
God's ideal, and then the reality of what is actually taking place.
So one of them's actually taking place and one of them is God's reality. Brother Gregory. I've seen.
Perhaps two histories, but I like Rachel's explanation better.
So you prefer her version than yours?
Yeah, I was
two
gonna say-
histories that you could choose.
Well, yeah, two possible outcomes, but God's going to get his way. Like, he has everything set up how it's going to be. So I guess it depends who's going to do it.
I've got the impression she was saying God's ideal is this beautiful picture, and the reality is it's going to be a bad picture unless I misunderstood. What would you say?
Yeah. That this is how God wants it to be, but this is how it actually is.
So it's going to be bad. He wanted it to be good.
Well, I know that in the end it's going to turn out how he wants it to be, but I thought that, like right now, is how he sees it.
Yeah, that's what I thought. That's what I thought she said. That it can change into what God wants.
It can or it will. Because I thought you were
Sorry,
saying it
will.
could be either one.
Well, yeah, that's what I was thinking when I said two possible histories.
So you think it's going to be definitely good?
Well, it's going to be what God desires in the end.
So in the time of Christ, did he only desire 12 people to do this work for him?
Well, doesn't he require a small group of people to do that work, so that God gets the glory?
Why go to the leaders then? Sort of just to rub it in?
What do you mean by that?
Well, if you only wants a small group of people, the inference is that when he goes to the top men with all the structure and the money, with the potential of them glorifying themselves, that he's like you're suggesting. It seems to me that he doesn't really want to even use them. He just wants to rub it in that they're just a waste of time because he's not going to use them anyway.
He has to give them the opportunity, doesn't he?
Okay, so that means he would use them. I'm asking what's his I don't know, I'm going to say plan A and plan B because I don't think he operates in that way like we do.
Yeah.
But what's his? I mean, if he goes to the leaders first, isn't that what his ideal plan is? Which is with this huge infrastructure, well financed, that he's supposed to be doing this work, not this ragtag band of 12 uneducated men. Which one's his option that he wants to go for? I'm only asking because you said, well, he prefers to use sort of small groups.
Well, that's what I've read. So I'm inclined to think that he kind of knows how this is going to go, but he has to give the opportunity anyway. That's the way.
So let's just go through the motions.
Well, perhaps from God's perspective, but from man's perspective, I mean, they need to prove themselves, don't they?
So it's a foregone conclusion.
From God's perspective, he knows the outcome, so...
Dr. Graham.
Similar to what Sister Rachel was saying, I don't think it's God's will, the first one that she mentioned with the bright light, because if it was God's will...
So which one's not his will?
The first map.
I thought the first map would look really good, or did I misread?
I think it looks good, but I don't think it's perfect. So God's will would be that everyone would be saved.
How did we've got two maps. How are you reading these two maps? Maybe I've lost my track.
One's good,
Which one's good?
the first one.
Okay, and the second one?
The second one's even worse. The first one that's good is only good in contrast to the bad.
So one's good and one's bad. And What's that? What's this story showing us?
Saying if you're the salt of the earth, if you do the work that you're given to you, you can send light into places of the world, which is the first map. But if you don't do the work that's given to you, then there's going to be mostly darkness.
Okay, so how are you reading that? That we've got a history laid before us. We can choose, or one's inevitable.
We have a choice.
I don't think that's what she's saying, or what Gregory's saying. It seemed to me.
Yeah,
I might have misunderstood what they were saying.
I might have as well.
that's what I meant. I think we have a choice. It depends on our actions, what it's gonna look like. But I thought that she was saying right now, the work is years behind. The reality right now is that it's dark, because we haven't been doing the work, but we could change that, maybe.
Maybe.
No, we could. It depends on our actions.
Brother James. You had your hand up, yeah?
Well, as things are being talked about, other ideas are popping into my head, but I definitely see what seems to be two possibilities. The second paragraph is what I'm a little stumped on. I can't tell. It seems to be present tense, though. And so, if it's present tense, it's showing what the work is and what has to be overcome for it to become the second map. If it's present tense, if that makes sense. But I don't know that it's present tense. It could just be in the future. These are the two possibilities. But I think God's will is definitely the first.
Brother Bob?
I'm going to pass.
You gonna pass?
Yeah.
Who is this talking about? It says, in the visions of the night, 28.1, an impressive scene passed upon me. I saw these balls come in. This one person said, "Oh, I knew they were coming, but I didn't know they were coming so soon." And the other person said, so other people said, "You knew and you didn't tell us." She woke up, she goes back to sleep, and she's basically going to have the same, or a related vision, I want to say the same one, a related vision. Now she's in some kind of strategy room where there's this map and they're making some kind of battle plan, it seems to me. That's kind of the context that I'm picking up. And there's this map of the world where you've got all your agents there. This is the Lord's vineyard, and it must be cultivated. As light from heaven shone upon anyone, that light was reflected to others. Then lights were to be kindled in many places, and from these lights still other lights were to be kindled. So everyone's lighting each other. Then the words repeated from Matthew chapter 5, which is basically the purpose of God's people. It's neither negative or positive except for the first bit. No, in fact, even it's not negative, it's just a matter of fact what the purpose of these various things are. These candles and the salt. Next paragraph. Saw jets of light shining from city to city, from place to place, and the map's removed, and there's another one that's put in its place. If every soldier of Christ had done his duty. So I want to ask, I've seen your hand. Let me just check something quickly. So we're in 9T. 90's published in 1909. So I haven't looked in detail. This book's probably 10 years in the making, maybe a little bit less, 5 or 10 years. It takes, they collate quite a lot of information. It will tell you in the book. I'll have a quick look because people will say I've said something wrong. I think it's around 1902. So it's about a 7-year period. And she has this vision about the map. And who's she talking to? Who's she addressing? When this person said, oh, I knew it was coming. Everyone's saying these are SDAs, yes? So the map or the vision is addressed to SDAs. Obviously this is coming at the end of the world. Now we already spoke, in fact it came up yesterday again if you remember, Matthew 24, you don't have to turn there, it's just, I'm just going to pick up one little phrase. Matthew 24:14, this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come. And when we looked at that, not yesterday but before, what parallel passage did we see Matthew 24:14 had? I know I'm not talking about Mark or Luke, I'm talking about another one that we looked at. Colossians 1:23. So this is Colossians 1:23. Now, we know that Paul basically does this almost single-handedly. I think that's a fair assessment of that history. Again, we're not going to make Paul an individual at the end of the world. We're going to make him a symbol of God's people. But if you go through the story of the New Testament, basically the New Testament is Paul. Besides the Gospels, everything else is essentially Paul, or some commentary on Paul's approach. There's a few letters, obviously, by John and Peter, one by James. Paul has this motif or concept or ideology, and it came up in the Sabbath school, actually, I think in church. It wasn't addressed specifically in that way. When you went to Hebrews chapter 10 or 11, I can't remember which chapter they went to, but Paul is going to talk about Israel. And he says there are two Israels, if I can express it that way. And you see the clearest modelling of this, I think, in Galatians chapter 4. So in Galatians chapter 4, he's going to talk about 2 wives, 2 sons, 2 cities, 2 mountains. Okay with that? Yeah? And he's going to call one, I guess, the earthly and one the heavenly. Just when we talk about the cities at least. So this Israel here, in the context of Revelation chapter 2 and 3, what church would we identify this to be? We've got these 2 Israels. Brother Graham. So we've got 2 Israel. Does that make sense what I'm talking about? He will say things like, all Israel is not Israel. Mm-hmm. Yeah?
So you're going to say Jews and Gentiles?
Okay, so which one would be the Jews and which one would be the Gentiles?
One on the left, the Jews.
Okay, so you're saying that these are the Jews and these are the Gentiles. Where would you place Paul? I'm going to because I just said a minute ago, there's two Jerusalems. There's Jerusalem 1 and Jerusalem 2. There's two wives, Hagar and Sarah, two sons.
In both?
He's in both. So he's here. This earthly Jerusalem. Sister Kathy.
The first Israel would be Laodicea, and the other one would be Ephesus.
Okay, so that was my original question. So you're saying this is Laodicea and Ephesus. So Brother Graham's made this to Jews and the Gentiles. So if you go to Romans 3:9, we'll go to Romans 3:9. Can you remember your question, Brother James, or do you want to ask it now if you can't hold it?
Well, I can remember it. It was about the paragraph.
Okay, I'm going to come back. Romans 3:9. What then? Are we better than they? Sister Bronwyn, who's the we? Who's the they?
The Jews and the Gentiles.
No, in no wise. For we have before proved, both Jews and Gentiles, that they are all under sin. So, if this is Laodicea and this is Ephesus, who's under sin and who's not under sin? Sorry?
The first is under sin.
These are under sin, and these...
Yeah, both are under sin.
So they're both under sin. So we can see this model isn't quite correct. So if they're both under sin, if you ignore this, the bottom bit, or we go Laodicea and Ephesus, Jerusalem that's here present, the earthly one, and the heavenly Jerusalem, which Jerusalem is under sin? Which church is under sin, Laodicea or Ephesus?
I'm not following it also. I don't understand what you're doing.
Is Ephesus under sin? In sin?
According to this passage?
Not according to that passage, because it doesn't mention Ephesus in that passage.
No,
Ephesus is not. So this is a group of people that's not under sin, or a church that's not under sin, and Laodicea is. You agree with that? So this is sin, and this is not sin. Okay with that? So who's under sin according to Romans 3:9?
both classes of people.
Both. So I'm going to change that and make it Jews and Gentiles. So here's the Jews and Gentiles. And here, Ephesus, this New Testament church, who is it composed of? I'll tell you in the passage. I'll tell you in Romans. You'd have to go somewhere else.
It could be both classes again.
Could be or is?
It is.
It
both
is, yeah?
classes.
So this is Jews and Gentiles as well. Paul speaks a lot about this, especially if you go to Philippians chapter 3 is a nice passage that you could go to. He talks about we and them. When he says we, he means we, Jews and Gentiles. You go to Galatians when he rebukes Peter. He said he used to eat with the Gentiles, but when his Jewish friends came, he dissembled himself and left, showing that he was not properly understanding this modelling. Are we all okay with it laid out this way? Yeah? So, according to Colossians 1:23, if you go to, I'm not saying to read it, Matthew 24, it says, "This gospel of the kingdom shall be preached preached in all the world." It just sort of says someone's going to preach this gospel. It doesn't tell you who's going to do it. And the inference is it's going to be the church, obviously. But in Colossians 1:23, specifically tells you who's going to do that. Does it? No, it doesn't. It doesn't tell you specifically who's going to do that. But if you go back into the history of the New Testament, who's actually doing this work? Is it this group or this group? Who's actually fulfilling Colossians 1:23? Laodicea or Ephesus? Ephesus, yeah? Because if you go to Matthew 23:38, Laodicea's house is desolate long before the work of Colossians 1:23 even begins. Yeah. The house is left unto them desolate. This is this church here. They're already a desolated church. They're in sin, under sin, not fit for purpose, and it's this group that are going to be doing this work. Now, when we just read this passage in 9t, Ellen White's here, and she's saying, this is just SDAs. This is us. And she's talking about this future event. So, if you were to read that as a regular church-going SDA, and you see the mess that the church is in, what would you be doing? What would you be thinking? You see the structure above you, you're just a layperson. Sister Andrea, what would you be thinking? Just a regular church member, you read this passage, 2 maps, and you say, look at the church.
I didn't read the passage, so I don't
Oh,
know.
okay.
Sorry.
I'm talking about those that you were here in the class yesterday evening? No, you weren't. Oh, okay, too much, sorry. Sister Bronwyn, regular church member.
I think let's strive to be that first map.
Okay, who's us?
Let's the church get out of this and go spread the gospel so that we can have lights all over the world.
So you're going to be talking to your elder and praying for your pastor and the conference structure. This is what Ellen White funnels us into, this thought process that the church is going to be intact, shouldn't have offshoots, we're not going to have this elite group coming out of the church. There's all of these passages that she's going to give to us because she has a perspective that Seventh-day Adventists are going to run all the way to the end. Is that a fair reading?
Yeah.
But here, you have the same dynamic. The leadership of the church cannot believe, they cannot accept that you're going to get this group here, this 12, comes 13, who's going to go and do this work. In fact, Christ in Matthew 23 says, when you people try to do evangelism, what do?
Pray. Even worse devil than yourself.
Yeah, you make them the sons of Satan, much worse than you already are. Because they don't even know the rules. At least you know some rules and you have a semblance of being children of God. Semblance, children of God, Laodicea. The other ones don't even know how to operate. So they become worse than you. So it's this group that's going to do this work for them. So the only reason I mention that is the way 9T is written, it just seems to be the SDA conference structure has to get its act together. We use the concept or the phrase, you have to stay in the boat, stay in the ark. Don't leave, just try and get the ark into good shape so it's fit for purpose, so that map works properly. But you know, in this history, before you can do Colossians 1:23, before you can go and give the gospel to the world, there needs to be this separation or this tension in God's church between Laodicea and Ephesus. You can see that? And so when we come to the last part of 9T, page 28 onward, we know that this can't be referring to the Seventh-day Adventist conference structure or the structured church, or what Ellen White would call the regular lines. Can't be referring to that if we know that this history is going to be repeated. So this statement has to be talking about whom? Has to be talking about Ephesus, called the church triumphant, the church that conquers, Revelation 6. And so this must be referring to us. So we need to ask ourselves, what are we fulfilling? Are we going to be fulfilling this small scattered map, or are we going to be fulfilling this map that's got light all across the globe? So I just wanted to add that point in, that this, if you're going to see how history repeats, this is a specific criticism, if I can say it that way, of this movement and its inability, its unwillingness to actually do what God wants it to do, depending on how we read this. Brother James.
History can definitely repeat, but as I reread the paragraphs, it says, for the second map, it says, our instructor said, this darkness is the result of men's following their own course, and why. Okay? The next paragraph, so second to last, says, if every soldier of Christ had done his duty, the world might ere this have heard the message of warning. And so I still see that there's two possibilities for the two maps, but it's for present time, for her time is what how the vision seems to be being given. It could have been the first map right then when he's talking about it, but the second map is the way that it is. Not saying that history can't repeat, and not saying that we're not doing the same thing, but that's the way it seems like it's written.
Anyone else?
I was just thinking through this topic, we've got the story of Jonah and Elijah. They were fit for purpose. And
Which people?
Sorry?
The two.
Elijah and Jonah. They were fit for purpose but had hesitations and unwillingness to do what God had planned for them. And at the end of the day, God was poking and prodding and jabbing here and there to bring about what he wanted, and in Jonah's case, having him swallowed to be transported by a sea creature. So I'm just wondering, if a party is unfit for purpose, does that mean God will take their candlestick away and find someone else who will do it? But if a person's fit for purpose, he can still work with them to bring about his desired outcome.
So in the story of Jonah, he forces him into submission.
I don't know about force, but he certainly interferes a fair bit to try and communicate to Jonah what he wants. In other words, I think if Jonah stuck to his guns, it's a possibility he could have been shoved aside and God would have...
He would have died, wouldn't he?
Well, yeah.
And taken the rest of the sailors with him.
Look, that's yeah. Would have been serious, but I still think it's a bit of both. Jonah could still had a choice.
Yeah, he has a choice, but God puts a lot of leverage on him.
Absolutely, yeah.
And if he had said, well, I'll stick to my guns, he would have been taken out,
Yeah.
killed, and someone else would have had to have done that work.
Yeah.
Well, God knows how each of us has to be prodded for us to realize what we need to do. We don't see, everybody stopped on the road somewhere and blinded and Jesus speak to them. But we know that's what it was going to take for Paul for it to click in his head. Same thing with Jonah. Not everybody gets swallowed by a whale, but that's what needed to happen for Jonah to understand what he needed to do.
Because they're rebellious.
Yeah.
Either rebellious or have a misunderstanding. I guess you could be rebellious because of a misunderstanding. Paul was.
So Jonah's not rebellious?
Yes, I see him.
Saul is not rebellious?
Yes.
Kicks against the pricks?
Yeah.
I don't think he misunderstands anything. What would he be misunderstanding?
What was mentioned, preconceived ideas. They think they know what right is, but it's not right. Isn't that a misunderstanding?
Yeah, but The disciples have a misunderstanding,
Right.
and they get on the right side of the boat
Right.
of the issue. Saul has a misunderstanding, but he's absorbed in worldliness and self-ambition. So misunderstandings aren't going to be a good excuse.
Oh, I didn't say it was a good excuse. I didn't mean to imply that at all.
All I'm saying, it's just pure rebellion, because the disciples aren't rebellious at that level. They just don't understand because they've been taught wrong information. But Saul doesn't have doesn't have that luxury. One of the most educated men, he knows the scriptures in and inside out, and he knows what all of these people are talking about when they talk about these Old Testament prophecies being fulfilled. But he's got ambition in front of him. Okay, so the only point I wanted to bring up is, I'm saying this is a reference to this movement, and we have this option before us whether or not we're going to pass or fail. I want to pick up one more point while we're here. So let's go back up a bit. Didn't realise it's so far up. 13.1. The scene that next passed before me was an alarm of fire. Men looked at the lofty and supposedly fireproof buildings and said they're perfectly safe. The fire engines could do nothing to stay the destruction. The firemen were unable to operate the engines. Contextually, that seems to me to be talking about the day of the Lord. How do we turn this into 9/11? Daniel?
Daniel 11 verse 1. It's a flashback in the midst of a history. I don't see a problem with that.
So this is not talking about the day of the Lord. You're saying this is a flashback.
Yeah.
That's how you're going to say that.
Yeah, I'm not denying all, not just New York, but all the cities of the world are going to be destroyed in the day of the Lord. So yes, all the cities are going to be destroyed as New York, but I don't.
Where'd you get New York from?
Because she's talking about New York.
Okay.
But
How do you know she's talking about New York?
in the beginning of the vision,
Oh, maybe I missed that.
Yeah.
12:1.
New York City. On one occasion.
On one occasion, when in New York City, I was in the night season, called upon to behold buildings rising story after story. It says these are buildings in New York, or she was in New York.
she's in New York and she's beholding the buildings.
Of New York.
Yeah.
You want to read that into that, because you didn't say that. I don't mind you reading into it, but she didn't say that, did she? She said these are New York buildings.
I was in the night season called upon to behold buildings rising story after story towards heaven. That's in New York, isn't it?
Not Shanghai, not London.
Not Arkansas. I think it's in
I think if you go to Little Rock, there are some huge buildings there that rise up to heaven.
So are you saying she is in New York and she's having a vision of somewhere else?
All I'm just reading, I'm saying she didn't say the buildings are in New York. We've read that into that passage. That's all I'm asking.
I think that's in New York.
Just because she's sleeping in New York.
What it means when it says, I was in the night season called upon to behold buildings rising story after story towards heaven. It's not saying that's a vision that she's having about other place. I think it's talking about.
I don't mind what you think. I'm not asking. I'm just asking what she's saying. I'm not attacking what you think. I'm just saying she didn't say these buildings are in New York. You want to read that into that because she's having a vision in New York.
I don't see she's having a. Okay. I don't see she's having a vision. She was called upon to behold buildings rising story after story towards heaven, and she's in New York. I don't think that's a vision.
Yeah, when it says, I was in the night season, you don't think that night season I was called upon to behold. You don't see that as a vision. Tell me what this paragraph is saying. She paid a visit to New York once. She was asleep in New York. Yeah? And then she, what? What happened?
And then she's having a vision.
I'm not trying to sort of pound you into the corner, but I don't know why you'd want to read something like just a simple reading of it. It says she's in New York, she had a dream, lots of buildings, and these buildings are being created because these men want to oppress the poor people. So you're saying that it's really bad in New York, this oppression of all the people in New York. Doesn't happen anywhere else. It's really, New York is the evilest city in the world, because I'd contend that it isn't. I don't think New York is the evilest city in the world in this context, that the rich oppress the poor. I think there are places you could argue that are far worse or as bad. But that would be just my opinion. Brother Theodore.
Just dealing with this idea of her being in some place and having a vision, there are other places where she does the same things and we associate where she was with what she sees, such as the Loma Linda vision regarding the earthquake and things like that. So whether it's correct or not, it is what is assumed. So it is an interpretation, but it's just that there is a precedent of doing that.
I'm happy that it's an assumption.
Yeah.
We may have other passages, but it's not always that case.
Yes, it's not always that case.
Brother James?
That's what I was just going to
Okay.
say. It's not always the case, because there's many times where she says she saw these things, whatever they are, and when she gets to another country, another state, another city, she's like, this is the place that I saw in my vision.
Okay, so I don't know what you think about the New York. It's not just anybody, it's just anybody. Just that you're sitting in the centre of the class. So you want to make 13.1 a flashback.
Yes.
Okay, let's go back to that flashback. 13.1. What are you flashing back? So the reason you're doing the flashback, if you were in the class yesterday, 12.3, 13.2, it sounds like you're buying into that is the day of the Lord, and now you're flashing back. Does that seem reasonable to you, the way it's written? The scene that next passed before me is a totally different subject, nothing to do with this one.
The same way we look to Daniel 11, verse 1, and we see that.
You think that's the same way?
Yeah. Well, we have many passages that we can make different applications.
I don't mind making applications. I'm asking what she says. Because application is not what she says, is it? What does application mean, Brother Stephen?
You can apply it to your own thinking.
So, application means what you think, not what the author thinks. Is that a fair statement of what you said? Is that how you understand application? but not exactly.
Yeah.
So Joel talks about the dark day, doesn't he? Yeah? And Peter says, do you remember what Joel was talking about? This is what it is. Dreams and visions. Joel wasn't talking about that, was he? Wasn't he talking about himself? His own history. Or not?
I don't know.
Okay, well, I'll go with the easier one then. Jeremiah. When he says the day of the Lord, what's he talking about?
Yeah, he's talking. He can be talking about many things. The first thing he's talking about, I think he's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. And the second thing he may be talked about is about the close of probation, Daniel 12:1.
Jeremiah chapter 30, he says, whatever I'm talking about looks like what?
Okay.
Jacob's time of trouble. What is Jacob's time of trouble? What's he just done? Brother Gregory, what's he just done? Okay, is everybody... Do we need to read the verses or are we okay? Do you want us to read the verses?
Yeah, maybe.
Okay. So we'll go to Jeremiah first before we go to Genesis. So go to Jeremiah chapter 30 verse 7. Alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it. So, Jeremiah 30 verse 7. What's he talking about, Brother Gregory? It says that day.
I want to say the application at the end, but Jeremiah wouldn't be talking about that. He'd be talking about the literal of his time. So would that be destruction of Jerusalem?
Okay, so I'd go with that. So these we've used this concept here about the destruction of Jerusalem, but we could broaden this out and use a term. I'll suggest the term, the captivity. So if we think about the captivity, it's not talking about it's just a singular hard event. It's a bit before and a bit after. So you just encapsulate the whole of that history as the captivity. He talks about that day. So he's saying what's about to happen is like, it is even the time of Jacob's trouble. He didn't even say it's like, it says it is Jacob's time of trouble. But he shall be saved out of it. So what's he just doing there? He's gone back to Genesis. And you want to take us to Genesis chapter 32? So okay, we won't even read it. I think we're familiar enough. So Genesis chapter 32, Jacob's time of trouble. So when Jacob is fighting with this angel, is he talking about the destruction of Jerusalem? He's saying, let me have a fight with the angel because this is about the end of the world. He's not doing that. This is about something personal that's going on with him. Jeremiah is going to go back into Jacob's history, and he's going to say, whatever's about to happen now, it's a similar experience that Jacob had. Now, it's not the full, complete story, because then you'd have to go and see, well, what is Jacob's trouble? Who is Jacob? What's the wrestling all about? And then make an application to his time. And then Ellen White is going to say, okay, we're going to quote Jeremiah, and she quotes Genesis as well, and she says this is going to happen at the end of the world. So you get a story about a man in his personal walk with God as he confronts death, that Jeremiah is going to use that history, and then we're going to end up using that history. So it gets recycled over and over again. That's how I understand applications. To me, it's one of the clearest places that you can see.
And the New Testament writers do this all the time. When they'll take something like the virgin birth in Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14, we somehow think that has to be directly a prophecy about the birth of Christ in order for them to do that. And so we ignore the actual context in which that occurs. And so we need to realize that the New Testament writers are always making applications that are not intended by the Old Testament writers.
One of the okay, no, I don't want to go. There are many applications we could do. I was going to go to a New Testament, but I think the point's been made about applications. So if you come back to 1913.1, if you're going to make this a flashback, what you're going to have to do is say, the scene that next passed before me is totally out of context in relationship to the time of trouble. And you want to do that to preserve 9/11. Or you actually say that that's exactly what she's doing.
Yeah. We also have evidence that we always use. Deuteronomy 18:18. We apply to 18:18.
I'm happy with applications.
So
You just keep falling into the same ditch.
yeah, but that's
I'm happy to make applications. But, okay, if you want to go to Deuteronomy 18:18, who's he talking about? When he says, the Lord is going to raise up a prophet like unto me, who's that talking about?
Christ. John the Baptist.
Which one you want to go for?
Both.
To make it both, you were going to make an application, because Peter's going to say it's Christ. He actually quotes Christ, that it's Christ, when he does that in Acts 3. But Christ isn't even there in 18:18. I mean, the increase of knowledge. He's not there. That's talking about John, isn't it?
Yeah.
First angel's message.
Yeah, I know, but we make an application for Miller in 18:18, and we use Deuteronomy 18:18, and that's 19:11. So that's another evidence that we always use to apply for an event.
I'm happy about what we've always done. I'm not trying to argue that. All I'm trying to say is, how are you going to reconcile what we read yesterday with what we've always done? And you're saying we're going to use flashbacks to get us out of this difficult situation. I can't say that you're wrong. I can't say that you're wrong. I don't know. Maybe it was a flashback. I can't prove that it isn't. It seems unreasonable to me. Seems unreasonable to me. I want a small diversion. I don't know if I can find this. I don't like to do something that I'm going to do, if I can find it. Okay, I don't like critiquing people's comments or statements when they're not there, but I'm going to do that. GC 635 paragraph 1. GC 635 paragraph 1. Just go to chapter 40 if you're going to find it. It's chapter 40, first paragraph. Why am I bringing this up? Sorry?
Jacob Thompson.
Sabbath school, because it came up in Sabbath school. Okay, so read the first sentence, and everyone says the human laws are the Constitution. Okay, so let's just read that. When the protection of human laws shall be withdrawn from those who honour the law of God, there will be in different lands, not in the United States, a simultaneous movement for their destruction. So there's human laws that protect the lives of people in different lands, and simultaneously those protective laws are going to be withdrawn. Now, I'm pretty sure that 99% of the world doesn't have a constitution. It's not the Constitution, which is what was referred to here. You can make an application that that's the Constitution, but these human laws, not the Constitution, I would argue. Because we just skipped over, because we went to another passage to prove that the Constitution are human laws to protect your civil and moral rights, which is true. But this is a simultaneous thing that's happening across the globe. And the Constitution doesn't have that kind of power anywhere except the United States. I mean, it doesn't even reach to Canada, your next door neighbour. So I would argue that this is, whatever it's referring to, is not the Constitution. You can make an application of that. So I only mention that because it's so easy to force things into our thoughts and ideas, and it's easy to miss things. Okay, so Brother Daniel wants to make this a flashback. I'm not going to say he's totally wrong. I don't think it is a flashback. So assuming it isn't, how do we approach this? Okay, Brother Daniel says 90:13.1 is a flashback. And a flashback to me means he's going to take this and make it a hard 9/11 quote. This is a 9/11 quote. And I'm saying, to me, it doesn't seem that way. It seems to me what's being brought to view here is that these people are having all of these buildings, they're oppressing the poor. This is a worldwide phenomena. And now it's come up and today. Now they're going to have to pay. And she's going to tell you how they're going to pay. So the scene switches and it says, this is how you're going to pay with these plagues. And then obviously the next paragraph says, I'm instructed that when the Lord's time comes, if there isn't any change, that no earthly power is going to stay the hand of God, and no material can be used in the erection of buildings that will preserve them. So it seems to me that the last part of 13.2, it says basically when God touches the buildings, nothing can stop them. The fire engines won't help. And it seems to me that 13.2 is the day of the Lord, and what's being referred to there is 13.1. That's how I would read that. But if it's a flashback, it's a hard 9/11 statement. Brother James.
It looks like it's a progression of the vision, if you want to say it that way to me. To prove that it's 9/11, you need more than that paragraph. You have to have a couple of the paragraphs before, so I don't know how I could could make that, just that one paragraph, a hard 9/11.
So what we do is we don't just say that one paragraph, because we're going to use symbology of 9/11. Testimonies Church Volume 9 begins page 11. So we have sort of various arguments. We have some other passages. But if this is not, say if this is not that, say she has the vision in New York and it's a worldwide phenomena, say if it's that, how would we approach this issue? Because otherwise we could just pack our bags and say 9/11 was an aberration and we sort of made it up and it doesn't really mean anything. We end up destroying the whole, we don't have a movement, we have no reason to exist, which many people are now saying. The context of this passage, seems to me the context is the day of the Lord. So how would the context show us that 9/11 is still firm?
Oh, I'm not saying that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So my question is, how do we maintain 9/11?
Just make an application.
We'll make an application.
Yeah.
Yeah? So, I'll give you an example. Oh, Sister Bromman.
We don't need this quote for 9/11. This quote came after 9/11, after the details of 9/11. This quote isn't what our understanding of 9/11 is founded on. It's a peripheral. Am I wrong?
Yep, the quote was used afterwards to say it was to prove 9/11. If proof is maybe not the right word, I don't know.
9/11 already stood on its own before this quote.
On what?
On the methodology that this movement's been using to prove that there's waymarks in our history.
So history repeats.
Okay, yeah.
Is that what you?
Yeah.
Third well.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Without this quote.
If you're going to go to the third woe, and you try and use inspiration to do that, you're pretty stuck, I think, because the third woe, I think Ellen White, which is the winds, essentially, she's going to shift them to either destruction of nature or political strife, and she'll very subtly shift it all the way to here. You'll be hard pressed to drag it further into our history. Our arguments become quite sophisticated to actually be able to do that. Theodore?
This is more an aside, but there is a video of some Adventist preacher in the late 1990s talking about 9 testimonies and saying that the Twin Towers are going to be destroyed. You know, so people have made these types of applications even before 9/11, and we as Adventists do it all the time with all kinds of things that we read in the Bible and the Spirit of Prophecy. So we are always making applications. You know, the question is, are they valid applications?
Okay.
Yeah.
You almost tempted me to say he was not the only person who was prophesying 9/11, because other people did it as well. I can't really say it, I'll get into trouble. So let's go to Numbers, book Numbers 24. Numbers 24. Verse 15. You okay, Brother Daniel? No, I'll read. Just because of the mic pickup, that's the only reason. I don't like to hear my voice. You were smiling, I thought there was something funny. Numbers 24:15. Balaam's final oracle. And he took up his parable and said, Balaam the son of Beor hath said, and the man whose eyes are open hath said. He hath said, which heard the words of God, and knew the knowledge of the Most High, which saw the vision of the Almighty, falling into a trance, but having his eyes open. Okay, before we read on, that's just the preamble. What's he talking about? Verse 15. Sister Pam, what's he talking about in verse 15? Just paraphrase the verse or pick up some key point. Sorry? I didn't quite hear what you said.
I don't know about whose eyes, man's whose eyes are open, it said. So he's giving a parable.
Okay, so the first thing is, this, whatever he's going to talk about is a parable.
Right.
So I want us to see that.
Yeah.
There's a parable. What else?
And his eyes were open, and he was having a vision.
So it says the man whose eyes are open. And who is the man that has his eyes open?
Balaam.
Balaam. So he's talking about himself. Are we okay with that? He's speaking about himself. So he says, my eyes are open, and I'm about to give a parable. 16. He hath said, which heard the words of God, and knew the knowledge of the Most High, which saw the vision of the Almighty, falling into a trance, but having his eyes open. So, what's that saying?
A vision during the day.
So, God's giving him this, if we call it an open vision, they're having a vision right there and then. It's not a night vision, not gone to sleep. So, this is a day vision. So, as soon as you start thinking about day visions, where might it lead us to? Because he's making the point, this is not a night vision. Got my eyes wide open while I'm having this one.
44 to 84.
Is this the problem?
Night season.
Okay, so night season. But why were you picking up that phrase, night season?
It's in
Oh,
contrast
because of-
to day season. I don't know.
Sorry?
Because the contrast to day season.
Okay, so I can't remember if we mentioned this at the beginning of class. I think we did. When we went to early writings. Early writings was written when, Brother Larry, or published? Brother Bob?
I don't recall.
Sister Rachel? Without looking? No looking.
I don't know.
Brother Gregory? Brother Graham?
1882.
1882. So 1882, it's written for what purpose? So this is my spin on this. It's not provable. This was my suggestion. What's its purpose, Brother James?
Prepare them for the latter rain.
So this is to prepare them for 1888. There are a number of key dates here, but the one we want to pick up is 1884. And we've got 1844. And I'm sure we did do this because this is Portland and this is Portland, Maine and Oregon. And this is 40 years. And this 40 years is Ellen White's open visions, with her eyes open, if you like, and then she only has night visions. So I'm suggesting, without even going into any details, for him to make this point, which is really an irrelevant point, and he wants to take 2 verses just to tell you that he had his eyes open when he's having this vision, and what difference would it make? Numbers 24:17. I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him, but not nigh. There shall come a star out of Jacob, and the scepter shall rise out of Israel, and shall smite the corners of Moab, and destroy all the children of Seth. And then it goes on. What's this talking about? Sister Sue Ellen. Sorry?
I don't know.
Okay, so we'll walk through it together, because I don't know very well either. So we'll go through it together. You're in Numbers 24:17, yes? Verse 15 and 16. Balaam is having this vision, and this vision, this trance that he's having is while he's awake. You okay with all of that? He's going to explain the vision that God gave him using what methodology, what technique will he use to explain the vision? In verse 15. Parable. So he's going to explain this vision using parables. Now again, I'm not going to go into, what that would mean or the implications of that, but simply stated, what are parables? Prophecies. I had a number of different answers. Stories. There's stories that teach lessons. Prophecies. So there's stories that teach lessons. So if you have a story that teaches you a lesson, that must mean what? The story came before whatever you want to give the lesson about, because otherwise it wouldn't have been any good. You have to have something happen before to help you to learn this lesson. So as soon as we start thinking about parables in the framework of stories, then we're saying you had your story, and then what do you have after the story? What do you have after the story? You said the story teaches you a lesson. So you're going to have the lesson. So we parallel them. The story teaches you a lesson. So when we say prophecy, how can we say parables of prophecies? How does that work? Brother Bob? Because I thought a prophecy was a delineation of events. Look, here's a prophecy. So how do you get parables to be prophecy? Explain that logic.
Because they're pointing, the story isn't a literal story. It's not a literal story that's going to happen the way the story's written. It is prophetic because it's talking about it is talking about a future event or future events.
So you've got a parable, or you're going to call it a story.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's the story, and you're going to turn parable into prophecy. So how are we going to do that?
You in certain language you have to make an application of it. What does it apply to something that is going to happen in the future?
You've got to do that in the framework of, you said prophecy.
Yeah.
Because you're leaning heavily upon what was said a moment ago about stories and lessons. But you said parable is prophecy,
Yeah.
so you need to answer in the framework of that. I'm not trying to say you're wrong. I just want, if we make a, what I'm going to say is a radical statement that parables equal prophecy, because that's what you said. I'm just saying, can you explain that? Because we say it sometimes, we've started to say it more and more. We never would say that before. We would just say parables as you read that original definition that we had, but
Right.
we've shifted to say actually parables equals prophecy. People hear it, so we want to make sure that just have some kind of simple explanation of how we come up with that.
I see it, the story is it's symbolic of events that take place in the future.
They're symbolic of events that are going to take place in the future.
Yeah.
Who else said it's prophecy? Was it Stephen?
No, I would take it to a literal and to a spiritual with 1 Corinthians 15:46. From the
Say that again, I didn't catch that.
I would take the little story, you apply the little story first, and then apply it to a prophecy and be spiritual.
Sister Bronwyn.
How I reason it in my head is in Mark 4:34. It says, "But without a parable spake he not unto them, and when they were alone, he expounded all things to the disciples." So Jesus spoke in parables, and everything Jesus spoke was pointing forward, and when something points forward, it's prophecy. And then he would weed out the people that couldn't bear the prophecies. That's how my mind explains it to me.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else?
History repeats.
History repeats. History repeats is prophecy.
Yes.
How do you get that?
Great Controversy 3:43 says that's what happened in the past is going to be repeated. So the past is prophesying what's going to happen in the future.
So the past is prophesying what's going to happen in the future.
Yes.
Yep. Are we okay with that
Yeah.
kind of concept? So I'll just read one. This is 17MR 1.3. 17MR 1.3. And if you prefer, it's Second Selected Messages 102. Same passage, Second Selected Messages 102. And the reason I say if you prefer is because this is the passage that Brother Daniel took us to. It wasn't page 102, it was a bit further down. I think it was 105. Remember that? You took us to Second Selected Messages 105, I think. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So the passage, are we there? 17MR 1.3.
One point
1.3. I'm just going to, it begins, there are those now living. So I'm going to cut into the paragraph. It says, historical events showing the direct fulfillment of prophecy were set before the people, and the prophecy was seen to be a figurative delineation of events leading down to the close of this earth's history. The scenes connected with the working of the man and sin are the last features revealed in this earth's history. Who wants to have a go at that? What does that 2 sentences mean? I think it's 2 sentences. Historical events showing the direct fulfillment of prophecy were set before the people. The prophecy was seen to be a figurative delineation of events leading down to the close of this earth's history. Scenes connected with the working of the man of sin are the last features revealed in this earth's history. So I'll start. That is an inspired statement of what 2 or 3 of you already said a moment ago, whether it was what Brother Daniel said, Sister Bronwyn. It seemed to me that's what you were saying. Just want to read, but someone wants to just walk us through this passage. First sentence. Brother Larry, you have a go.
Historical events, you can go all the way back to 538, all the way to 1798.
Okay, so
One aspect.
I'm just going to say history. So you've got some history which is in the past. His story, okay? History.
And those have been fulfilled, and they also have a direct application for us.
Where does it say that?
Well, it says showing their direct fulfillment in prophecy. So, and then the next part is.
Oh, yeah, okay, what does that mean? Because you just said it means for us.
Well, that's later on in the sentence.
Okay, but, what does that mean? Showing the direct fulfillment of prophecy.
Showing that it was prophesied in the past. And
What was?
The event. Historical event. If it was in, it would be before. So, 1260 was prophesied before it happened.
Is that what that first part is saying?
That's what I think.
Okay,
So, yeah.
so it says there was a historical event. This one here.
It was a prophecy.
I've got two events, A and B. They were historical events, and those events were the direct fulfillment of prophecy. Is that what you're saying? Okay, carry on.
It says, were set before the people.
What does that mean?
It has to be written. I'm saying written in the Bible. They have to be brought before the people. Yeah.
Anyone else?
Brought to their attention.
Message.
Okay, so when is it being set before the people?
On the tables,
Sorry?
on those tables.
Okay, so when would that be?
1840.
Before or after the event? Brother Gregory?
You mean midway between A and B? Some things have been fulfilled, but not everything has been.
I just got historical events, so I picked up more than one event. Historical events showing the direct fulfillment of prophecy was set before the people. So I want to, where is it set before the people? In relationship to A and B.
The historical events were set before the people, so events have already taken place.
So where is it set before the people? Where shall I put the word set?
A is events between A and B.
A is one event. I've got two events.
Then after B.
So it's here. So we're now going to define prophecy as being what? Not something that's future. We're now saying prophecy in its definition has to begin in the past. So these historical events that were seen to be fulfillment of prophecy are now being set before the people here. Why are you setting them before the people here? What's the purpose of it?
History to prove that they were predicted.
So what? Why would you want to do that?
Like those events that happened before, those three that we were specifically looking at, to wake them up to the actual event that they need to have an eye on.
So
Second coming.
our focus is not on history. We don't care about history. History is a tool because we want to. I'll just put a single event. We're focusing on this one. And if you want to prove that this is right, you have to set before the people some kind of evidence. And the evidence that you have is that these historical events, 1 and 2, were fulfillments of prophecy. And once you can demonstrate that, and you're going to set it before the people here, then you go on to prove this. Historical events showing the direct fulfillment of prophecy were set before the people, and the prophecy was seen to be a figurative delineation of events leading down to closing Earth's history. Brother Larry, we're at, and the prophecy was seen. So what we're going to do with that?
And the prophecy of A and B.
How many prophecies is that?
That would be 2.
It says
Says it. And the prophecy, so it has to be singular.
singular prophecy. This is one prophecy. It's got multiple events, but it's one prophecy.
Okay,
So this is not line upon line. Just want us to see that. So here you've got the prophecy that's going to lead you all the way down. It's one prophecy.
Was seen to be a figurative delineation of events.
What does that mean?
That would be one after.
What does figurative delineation mean?
Figure is represents something. It's a figure, and the delineation, from my understanding, is points on the line.
Okay, so you gave us some dates. So I'll give. Can't remember what dates you use. I'll give you an example. So if that's 538, what's the figure? I'd say a figure, not the, because there's a couple of them.
Yeah, the
Give me a figure.
Would be Papal Rome, 530.
The Papal Rome is not a figure. Papal Rome is, you read it, everyone knows what Papal Rome is, it's the real thing. Yeah. What's the figure?
The beast.
Beast.
Yes.
We'll put a beast. Man of sin. A horn. So prophecy was seen to be a figurative delineation of a historical event. So you've got a historical event here, and you're not going to say the Ostrogoths were taken down. You're going to say a horn is plucked up. That's the figurative. That's the figure of that historical event. It leads down to the close of this earth's history. Where's that? Here. The scenes connected with the working of the man of sin, the last features revealed in this earth's history. So what she's doing here, she's taking this singular prophecy here, and she's going to show us that prophecy is not, if you live here, you're predicting the future. The only way you can predict the future is if you start in the past. Without that, you have no evidence or anything. So it's based upon this idea of this singular prophecy that runs all the way through. You have to get some other spirit prophecy quotes to develop this, and then what we end up what we do is we start cutting this line up in various places to get line upon line, which is parable teaching. Okay, we won't do it. We'll go to Numbers 24:17 this afternoon. We'll have a look at that. I want to suggest that when we come to 9:11, 9T, page 11 and onward, that maybe our approach might be different. That maybe flashbacks are not the way to go. Neither that she's directly talking about 9/11 in those passages, but there are hints and clues that we can make an application. If we're okay with that kind of terminology. But I want to give an example, and we're going to use the story of Balaam to do that. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we give you praise and thanks for your goodness and mercy. Lord, as you teach us, as we review things that we've learned in our class, Lord, help us to use and exploit the mental faculties that you have given to us, the structure of our humanity, so that these things can be retained in our hearts as well as our minds, and that they can become useful to us. It's in this way that Third Angel's message can become an abiding influence upon us. We ask for your continued guidance this day, for your protection. We ask for a blessing upon the food. All these things we pray for in Jesus' name. Amen.